This is the same background they always use. We're gonna get the cloak. We're gonna get the cloak. Well, that jury's gone, I think, Peter. Maybe it was the other mom.
Many themes that come across during this trial. One of them will be how bad we all are with technology. So we're going to bear with us. Sometimes the videos will lag. The PowerPoints and the evidence that we presented before you. Take a second, and you'll probably see the star of the show, the IT gentleman here at multiple occasions, helping us through the next couple of days. I know a lot of you guys, you and your spouses and close family members work in IT, so it'll be especially frustrating for many of you, but I can promise you it's way more frustrating for all of us. So I will apologize for all of us in advance, and we will try to move through this as effectively and efficiently as possible as we go through the next couple of days. I know you guys have lives outside of this courthouse, have jobs and family members that are just as important as your job that you'll have here over the next couple of days. 6. This defendant on August 7th, 2022, shot Quatavius Wright 6 times. 6 times at close range. As they were on the 3rd floor of a hallway near where both the defendant and Mr. Wright lived at 1314 Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway at the Parkside Apartments. That's what the evidence will show over the next couple of days. 6 times. One of them being a press contact wound to the chest, ladies and gentlemen. And then 6 other times along the torso and body of Mr. Wright. He is shot at close range. The evidence is going to show that this shooting was senseless, was unjustified, and it was intentional by this defendant when he shot and killed Quatavius Wright after a verbal argument that they were having in the area where they both lived. Now you're going to learn a lot about the evidence and facts and testimony in this case. But what you're going to
already got the photo with the kids.
Right. You're going to learn from Mr. Wright. He's a son. He's a brother. He's a father. And on August 7th of 2022, this defendant took him away from his mother, his kids, his siblings, and his significant other over an argument. Over a stupid argument. Senseless gun violence led to this defendant shooting Mr. Wright not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 6 times. And then flees the scene. Now, you're going to learn about the area where the shooting occurred. This is the area, the Bankhead
Donald Lee
area.
Hollowell.
The apartment is located at 1314 Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway. The evidence is going to show that the Parkside Apartments was a fairly new apartment complex that many of the residents have recently moved in, including this defendant and Mr. Wright over the last couple of months, about 6 months. This apartment complex, kind of an area that you guys may be aware of, is that it's about a half a mile or less from the Bankhead Mart station. So you literally can walk out of the apartment complex, take a right, and you can see the Bankhead Mart station for your purposes of kind of helping you know where we are as it relates to where this shooting occurred. This is the front side of the apartment complex. You'll see over the course of this trial a number of photographs as it relates to the shooting scene in itself, as well as the apartment complex itself, the surrounding streets and the surrounding area, like we just talked about, the Bankhead Mart station. What this photograph shows is the front area of the apartment complex. What you'll see during the course of the trial is that the entrance to the apartment complex is here to the left of the screen, and that as you travel through that entrance, you go into a parking lot, and that there's 2 buildings, building 1000 and then building 2000. And what the evidence is going to show is that this defendant and Mr. Wright both lived in building 2000. So you'll travel in through the apartment complex, you'll pass the 1000 building, and then you'll go forward and you'll see a second building, the 2000 building. The evidence is going to show that the 2000 building is a 4-story apartment building, and that this defendant and Mr. Wright lived on the 3rd floor. They actually lived about 5 apartments down from each other. What you're going to hear from several witnesses as they testify from this witness stand is that the defendant lived in apartment 2303 with his girlfriend, Miss Tierney Parks. Most people call her Roxy. And you're going to hear from her as she testifies before each and every one of you. And then you're going to learn that the victim lived in apartment 2308. So it's further down, about 5 apartments down, kind of catty corners. I'm going to describe what the evidence is going to show from where the defendant lived. And what the evidence is going to show, and you're going to hear from, the defendant lived, the victim lived with his girlfriend and longtime girlfriend, Miss Raquel James, and that he lived there with their son and Miss James's daughter, who also lived there. And they all kind of lived in that apartment. Now, this is a photograph as you're going into the apartment complex, and this is a picture of building 2000. And you'll see a series of photographs as it relates to several ways to enter and exit from building 2000, as well as the apartment complex. Like I said, we talked about who the evidence is going to show lived in apartment 2303 and apartment 2308. Now, the evidence is going to show that on August 7th of 2022, at approximately a little after 12:50 p.m., several residents heard several gunshots, heard shots fired.
So this is the middle of the
What the
day.
evidence will show and what you'll hear from the witnesses is that after the gunshots were heard, people came out of their apartments, peered through the doors, out the doors, and came into the hallway, and they saw Mr. Wright, who had been shot 6 times. The timeline of the events and the evidence is going to show, which drives the entire investigation. You're going to hear from the lead detective, Detective Raquel Johnson, that there's a 911 call that's made by a resident. You're going to hear witness statements that were made to the detectives and to officers. You're also going to see video surveillance footage that Detective Johnson and her team were able to find, not only from the Parkside apartments, but as many of us talked about.
So it seems like during the last hearing, Abbate said he wasn't sure if we're gonna hear the defendant's statements to officers after he was Mirandized. He wasn't sure if they were going to use that, but it's on this PowerPoint.
Have ring cameras where Detective Johnson was able to get short clips from residents who lived down the hallway in building 2000. You're going to hear about the viewing of the video surveillance and the importance of it, and why it's important, and how the defendant's clothing that he's seen wearing in the video surveillance is incredibly distinctive. It is part of what the evidence will show as how the defendant was identified. You're going to hear about the defendant's actions after the shooting, as well as a statement he made when he was eventually arrested about a month later, on September 8th of 2022. Now, what the evidence is going to show, what kind of forms the timeline of the incident, and how Detective Johnson and homicide detectives and officers who arrived kind of started their initial response, and where they began to search for video surveillance at the time of the shooting occurred. What the evidence is going to show is that at 12:58 p.m., a 911 call was received by dispatch, and that 911 call relayed that a male was shot and was down at the end of the 3rd floor hallway. That the resident heard gunshots and heard running down the hallway.
So what do we have so
You're also
far?
going to hear from Officer Simon. What Officer Simon is going to tell you and why he's important as it relates to the timeline of the investigation is he was the first responding officer. And I say that in the sense that he responded because he was already on the scene. He's going to tell you that he was there that morning investigating a series of interganos, or a bunch of cars that had been broken into Parkside apartments, and that he...
Here we go. This is where they're going to connect the dot. Remember, the indictment involves three felony murder counts. One of the predicate acts for one of the counts is an aggravated assault relating to the same incident. Like, I'm taking this firearm out, this is the firearm I'm using, and I'm shooting at you with it. That's aggravated assault, and it resulted in your death. That's the first felony murder count. One victim, one incident. The other two felony murder counts deal with 133 and 131. So possession of a firearm by a convicted felon and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon during the commission of another felony. The other felony being the aggravated assault used as the predicate act in, like, it's cyclical. We have a very cyclical indictment, self-supporting indictment. And then here we're now hearing, let's see if you guys get where I'm going. Let's run this back 10 seconds.
There that morning, investigating a series of interganos, or a bunch of cars have been broken into.
One of the underlying, the prior acts that support 133, the previous conviction, different indictment, that supports the 133 count for felon in possession, previously convicted of a different felony, is breaking into auto. So there's the dot. I think there's the dot that the state's going to use and rely on as we move forward for the jury to make the leap that this is a similar pattern of behavior. And while this might be excludable, because I don't know if they have evidence to show that the break-ins on the night that Wright was killed are related to the death of Wright. They might not have evidence for that, but they're using this indictment as a way to get something in without having to meet that burden, to let the jury know that, hey, this guy's previously been convicted of doing this thing that happened this night at the same time. This is a very roundabout way, and maybe they will have evidence that shows the same guy that they identified by the clothing is the same guy that goes and kills Wright. Still seems like bad character evidence to me. So, I don't know. Let's see what we get.
Apartments, and that he had spent his majority of his morning into the afternoon. It was there at 12:50 when the shots were fired. He's going to tell you that he heard several gunshots from the area of Building 2000.
Sorry, one more thing. And remember, we heard during the pretrial hearing, or if you didn't see that, if you missed it, McBurney was confused because the indictments that are included within the prior indictments that are supporting count 7, count 8, that are included in the indictment are not included in the recidivist notice filed by Michael Carson earlier in this case back in 2024. So they're specifically choosing to use an act. Now, it's making sense to me. Michael Carson puts together recidivist notice. Doesn't include I think it was a 2021, whatever the year was, the breaking auto conviction already was on the books, already happened before Michael Carlson filed that recidivist notice. That's what puts the defendant on notice of what they'd be facing if they take it to trial, what their sentencing timetables could be. So you're supposed to inform the defendant of everything, their rap sheet that you know about that's going to make you push the judge to give you a higher sentence within the allowable timeframes. But they pick and choose for the indictment language to use the breaking into auto. And maybe that's coloring within the lines. But what I'm saying is it's very close to coloring outside of them at best, is my view of it.
And once he hears those gunshots, he's going to tell you what his response was. He immediately exited his police vehicle and ran into the direction of Building 2000. He's going to tell you he could hear screaming from third floor or above in Building 2000. He immediately began to canvass the area for the shooters. You'll hear and he'll tell you about the fact that he ran down the side road, which is Pierce Road, which leads you to Donald Lee Hollowell. And he's going to tell you he couldn't find anyone, that he immediately went to tend to the victim. The victim had been shot several times and was not breathing. He's going to tell you that he immediately began to secure the crime scene, and why that's so important as it relates to any investigation that occurs. He's going to tell you that he notified some members of his team, the homicide unit, to come out and begin their investigation. The evidence is going to show that APD homicide detectives arrived, and that they kind of arrive as a team, but ultimately Detective Raquel Johnson is assigned as the lead detective on the case. Detective Johnson is going to tell you about how the crime scene was processed. You're going to learn, probably ad nauseum, about how the crime scene is photographed, and why it's photographed in the way it is. That a crime scene sketch was done based on the items of evidence that's found on the scene, and why that's important. And that ultimately, there was a collection of physical items of evidence from around the shooting location where Mr. Wright was found shot. And what you're going to hear about, what you're going to see, is that there were 6 9mm shell casings that were recovered around the area of where Mr. Wright had been shot and left to die. You're going to hear that Mr. Wright was then shot 6 times, and that there was a pink 9mm handgun that was recovered kind of near where the victim was laying in the hallway.
So the gun was just laying there?
Was laying in the hallway.
Well, that's interesting. All right, so we're just leaving a 9mm there. I'm interested in prints and, is it just a 9mm handgun? Do we have anything more than that? Are we going to get some analysis on markings?
You're also going to hear from the detectives and the officers how they canvassed the area. Again, they were canvassing for witnesses, anybody who could provide any information that could help the initial investigation. You're going to hear about the importance of the detectives knocking on doors and asking if anybody had any ring surveillance footage, asking if anybody had heard or knew anything as it related to the shooting and death of Mr. Wright. You're going to hear that Detective Johnson was able to locate video surveillance footage as it relates to the Parkside Apartments, and the information that she was able to gather and ultimately collect is that there were a number of cameras scattered throughout the property, within the building and in the surrounding areas of the buildings, that some of those cameras worked and some of those cameras were not operational, is what Detective Johnson is ultimately going to tell you. And what Detective Johnson is going to talk to you about is that she reviewed that day in the office and was able to download all the footage that she could. And she's going to tell you that she was unable, obviously the camera that was closest to the shooting was not operational. But
of course,
what she was able to locate, find, and download was a camera that is down the hallway from where the shooting occurred. And that camera captured the shooting. But what I will tell you is it captures it from a distance. So it's not going to be like what we see in CSI and all the other crimes.
That's pretty interesting because those looked like newer-ish apartments. I mean, was it just not set up or was it old and it wasn't working? Of course, though. Of course, this is the direction. It's not the camera that's far away that's not working. It's the camera that would actually show you maybe somebody's face, maybe identifying features, and not just somebody's clothing color. Because we heard earlier in this PowerPoint that it's really the clothing that they're relying on as part of their identification before they end up arresting Tuitt a month later.
Shows on TV where
gotta feel safe living there.
They have the technology and the ability to zoom in to where it looks 4K and you can see everything up close and personal. These video surveillance cameras at this apartment complex didn't have that ability. So what you see is individuals based on body language. It looks as if they're arguing. What you can see then is that as they're arguing, you'll see someone dressed in army fatigue, pull the firearm out, and then shoot at close range, who we know, or we learned to be Quintavious Wright on August 7th, 2022. The video surveillance footage that Detective Johnson was able to collect Though the actual shooting is far off, what the video surveillance footage shows is that this defendant and the individual that he was with ultimately identified as Mr. Quentin Forte through the investigation of Detective Johnson. And what the surveillance cameras are able to show as after the shooting occurred, you see the defendant shoot the victim 6 times. You see the defendant then take something off of the victim's body as he lay on the ground. And then you see him open the door of 2303, grab a bag, and then run towards down the hallway towards the elevator. And then what the video surveillance will then show is that him and Mr. Forte kind of stopped and congregated at the elevator landing area, hit the button. They choose or decide not to wait on the elevator. There's a staircase right next to where the elevator area is, where the surveillance footage shows the defendant and Mr. Forte go down the stairway on the 3rd floor down to 1st floor and run out the apartment complex or out building 2000 and ultimately across Pierce Road into a field, and then you lose sight of them as they approach or go towards Donnelly Hollow Parkway. As I mentioned, Detective Johnson was also able to get ring video surveillance short footage. And as everybody is aware with ring footage, it's short clips. And she's able to get several short clips similar to or showing similar things as the video surveillance footage that we just discussed from the Parkside apartments. But the main difference is the surveillance clips from the ring footage has sound. The Parkside apartments video surveillance cameras are not equipped with sound. They're just they just record what's going on. And so you'll be able to hear different things as it relates to what's getting said when the motion activated ring video records. And some of the things that you'll hear is you will hear and see Mr. Forte kind of yelling at the defendant about what he just did. You also hear Mr. Forte yelling to the defendant, grab my bag, and that's when you see them run to the elevator landing area. And what Detective Johnson will ultimately tell you is that in her review of the footage, the far distance camera where the shooting occurs, and then as the defendant and Mr. Forte run up the 3rd floor hallway where Mr. Wright and the defendant live towards the elevator, she's able to get kind of clear images of Mr. Forte, the defendant again in the elevator area, running down the stairs, and releases those images from the video surveillance footage into the media, on Facebook, things of that nature, through the APD, Facebook, as well as on the news.
So this right here would tell me that they might have these clips and somebody yelling, but whatever they're heard yelling, whatever they're seen doing, there's no personally identifying information or aliases as known as whatever. We know that Tuitt is in the system for, he has other convictions, at least one involving theft of auto, or breaking into auto, rather. So now Abbate is telling us we had to release images to the media to help find these individuals. We still didn't know. So I don't think we're going to hear, you're yelling at the defendant. We're hearing Abbate say he's yelling at the defendant. Is it the defendant? Doesn't seem like a name was being yelled. Doesn't seem like, hey, Cordarra Tuitt, grab the bag. So we'll see.
They are able to release, be on the lookout in Bolos for suspects and people of interest. And what Detective Johnson will tell you is that she released images like this. An image she was able to take a still shot of Mr. Forte.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so this is not Tuitt then. I was like, that doesn't really look like him. So this must be the other guy. So we have, let's see if we get more stills, because I was like, that doesn't look like the defendant. It's Forte.
Directly after the shooting. Images of the defendant.
Okay. I can't really zoom in on this. I wish it was bigger.
Army fatigue, like I described, with a firearm in his hand. Images of the defendant just after around 12:54 in the middle staircase, as we described, going down to the bottom floor to flee the scene. And based on the images that are released in the media and in different forms, different ways, Detective Johnson gets a Crime Stopper certificate, ultimately from a person identified as Detective Jesus Maldonado. And what the evidence will show, Mr. Maldonado will testify to, is that he was familiar with the defendant based on prior interactions that he had in 2018 with this defendant.
So he's ID'd by a former detective. Actually, I know this name. This was in a Facebook post that I saw from like 2017. Hold on, I'm gonna keep playing this. I'll put it up on screen in a second.
You will also hear
from June 17th,
2017. Forte. Her name is Almeda Forte, and through Detective Johnson's investigation, she was able to identify Mr. Forte and went to his mother's home, showed the photographs that we just saw, the still images, and she was able to identify the defendant in the army fatigue. Mr. Forte is later spoken to by the detectives. He also confirms the identity of the shooter in this case, Mr. Tuitt. Now, what Detective Johnson will tell you. All
right, let me put this up on screen. I'll show you this thing from 2017. It's got and I found it just by searching when I was just looking up stuff about the case, any buzz, any conversations. I just searched it on Facebook. Overlay. This should make it as big as it can go. The text is going to be a bit small. I'll read it. So we're talking about a bolo. We're talking about Detective Jesus saying he knew him from a prior thing. And the email, Detective Maldonado, Jesus Maldonado, his name was in this post. So it says, wanted, Cordarra Tuitt, 28, and it's hashtag Dunwoody, Georgia, Dunwoody Police, Felony Lane Gang. That's the page that's posting this. And they're relaying a feed from FLGTF USA, so maybe their Instagram. And then they're reciting what Jesus put out. So on June 8th, 2017, at approximately 7 p.m., the subject committed entering an auto at Brook Run Park and then used the victim's credit cards to purchase items from a local Target store. Warrants have been secured for the subject, charging him with entering auto and financial transaction card fraud. Anyone with information regarding this case or suspect, please contact Detective Maldonado. They put his number and then Jesus Maldonado at dunwoodyga.gov, or submit an anonymous tip, and then they put a link. And then there's a mugshot here of whatever they used for the warrant to put out this bolo back in 2017. So this image could have been taken from years prior to this, but they used it for the sake of this warrant. So there's that. A little bit of memory lane. But this is how it's the same investigator who's looking at... Let me take this down. Let's jump backwards. Who's looking at this and saying, oh, I recognize that guy. I have an experience with him from a prior case, from a prior investigation. So, and I don't know. So far, maybe they'll have more pictures. And we see a bag. We're going to hear, apparently, that someone's going to yell, get the bag from the door. But I wonder if we're going to see clearly somebody in fatigues. That's the last thing that we've got to see, right? That's going to be how Adam rounds out his PowerPoint? Or do we not get that on that faraway footage? So we'll zoom back forward. We'll see how they tied this together, and hopefully it's stronger than just Detective Jesus saying, hey, that guy looks like somebody that's bad news.
And based on the images that are released in the media and in different forms, different ways, Detective Johnson gets a Crime Stopper certificate, ultimately from a person identified as Detective Jesus Maldonado. And what the evidence will show, Mr. Maldonado will testify to, is that he was familiar with the defendant based on prior interactions that he had in 2018 with this defendant. You will also hear from the mother of Mr. Quentin Forte. Her name is Almina Forte. And through Detective Johnson's investigation, she was able to identify Mr. Forte and went to his mother's home, showed the photographs that we just saw, the still images, and she was able to identify the defendant in the army fatigue. Mr. Forte is later spoken to by the detectives. He also confirms the identity of the shooter in this case, Mr. Tuitt. Now, what Detective Johnson will tell you after the identifications were confirmed in her investigation, she then took arrest warrants out shortly thereafter, the identification of the defendant. What she'll tell you is that the case has been assigned to the Atlanta Police Department's Fugitive Task Force unit, and they begin their investigation into apprehending and locating the defendant. What you will hear through Detective Johnson and a member of the Fugitive Task Force is that the defendant was ultimately arrested at East Point at a hotel on September 8th, 2022, with his girlfriend, Ms. Parks, also known as Roxy. And after his arrest, he is taken to APD headquarters.
So this is interesting. We're going to hear about the statement to Detective Johnson. Remember, we didn't know if Adam wanted to use this. So we were talking about, is he going to try to ambush the defense, or is it something that doesn't help his case? And now we actually have the bullet points in the PowerPoint. This PowerPoint, that's the way it's worded is very strong. It's the defendant. He's seen. We have all this stuff showing him. We have these people IDing him. Things that are very compelling to a jury to show that we thought it was this guy. We have the right guy, if you take it at face value. But now we have statement to Detective Johnson. We're going to hear Adam talk about it, I'm sure. But reading it, it says, heard shots from inside his apartment, opens door and sees victim shot on the ground, flees scene because did not want to be involved. And that's exactly what I was thinking it could be if we do not have clear imagery. If we just have him going near somebody outside after this has happened to show that he's in the area, but we don't have him in these fatigues standing there point blank range. And thank you to YPCom Chic for sending over the zoom in of this photo. If we just have this and someone's coming out, it's daylight, you're hearing gunshots, you're there with your family, you're there with your girlfriend. Man of the house, you might want to go outside and check out what's going on. If you might get in trouble, if you've had run-ins with the cops where they think everything that happens is due to you, that you've got a target on your back, you might want to get up out of there. So this statement, these bullet points here, this statement could be entirely truthful. It's very plausible to me. And it's making sense to me why Adam didn't know if he wanted to bring it in or not, because the jury could hear the statement and say, that's reasonable. And I wonder if there's enough to show beyond a reasonable doubt that that isn't what this defendant was doing. So, let me pull this off. Thank you again, YP.
Let's
see what Adam says.
Is that she then enters the interview room. She reads the defendant Miranda rights, his rights, the right to remain silent, and things of that nature. And that the defendant ultimately decides to make a statement, to speak with it. And what Detective Johnson will tell you is that as she's speaking with the defendant, he begins to tell her that he was inside of his apartment, asleep, that he had just woken up. And as he was waking up, he heard shots being fired inside his apartment, apartment 2303. After he heard those shots, he then opened his door, curious about what he had just heard. And as he opened the door, he looked to his left and sees the victim lying on the floor. He tells Detective Johnson he sees the victim not only lying there, but obviously shot, and that he doesn't want to stay around to be involved, doesn't want to speak with the police, so he flees the scene. And you will hear and see on the video, because this interview is audio and video recorded at the interview room at APD headquarters. And what you will see and hear is that Detective Johnson, on a number of occasions, tells the defendant, we have video surveillance footage. This is on video. And you will hear the defendant say, okay, I'm still confused as to why I'm here. and then repeat that he just heard shots from inside his apartment. That he opened the door to see the victim shot, and then he fled the scene and he had no involvement. What you will also hear is Detective Johnson asking the defendant what he was wearing that day. And as Detective Johnson is asking the defendant this, he describes exactly what you saw in the still footages, or still images. The top and bottom and army fatigue, just as you saw in the video surveillance. But sticks with heard shots from inside the apartment, came out from inside his apartment, saw the victim shot on the ground, wasn't involved, left the scene because he didn't want to be involved. You will also hear from some experts in this case. One of those experts will be Dr. Colin Abbate. He is a senior medical examiner here in the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office. He will tell you that the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office received the body of Mr. Wright, received the body straight from the scene, the 1314 Donald Lee Hollowell address, that at the medical examiner's office, an autopsy of Mr. Wright was done, and that he was able to determine the cause of death and the manner of death, and that the cause of death was gunshot wounds to his torso, that he was shot 6 times. One of the shots on his chest, like I said, was a press contact wound. The other areas that are shot and his midsection were what he would describe as close range. He'll talk about why and how he's able to determine the range of fire of shots to a person. He'll tell you that one projectile was removed during the autopsy. That projectile was sent to the GBI, which you will hear from members of the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, as relates to their role and what they did as a part of the investigation here in the.
All right, I'm going to bug the chat. That seems weird to me. Was he shot and hit 6 times? Because that's what I take shot 6 times to mean. And then they only remove 1 projectile, which seems a bit unusual if you end up having, and again, the medical examiner is probably looking at this right away, but I don't know how quickly they got their surveillance, but if they keep talking about Mr. Forte, wouldn't they want to look at more than 1 projectile to see if it was multiple shooters?
A murder of Quintavious Wright. Lastly, he will explain to you what manner of death is, and that what he was able to determine the manner of death to be was homicide. Lastly, you will hear from a firearms examiner or expert, Abby Holman, who works with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's firearms section. She'll explain to you her qualifications, what she does, how she does it, the science behind it. And she will tell you how long she's done it and what it requires. She will talk to you about the evidence that she received from the City of Atlanta Police Department, Detective Johnson, the items that were collected from the scene on August 7th of 2022. And what Ms. Holman will tell you is that she received the cartridge casings that were found all around the victim's body. She received the pink 9mm handgun that was found close near to the victim's body. And
this last point,
she received the projectile that was removed during the autopsy. And what she can tell you, based on her analysis and comparisons, that her conclusion was that all 6 of the 9mm shell casings found around Mr. Wright were fired from 1 firearm. That the bullet removed during the autopsy revealed it was consistent with being fired to a similar list of firearms that the 9mm shell casings were fired from, that she was able to determine. But what she'll also be able to tell you is that the firearm that was close to Mr. Wright, she received it. She'll tell you about the process as it relates to what she does when she receives it. One of the things that she will tell you she does is she test fires the weapon. And she takes those test fires and compares it to the cartridge casings that were found on scene, as well as the other ballistics evidence. And what she will tell you is that none of the ballistics evidence that was found on scene were fired from the gun that was found near the victim. So what's happening? The evidence is going to show the gun found near the victim was never fired. Now, the judge can talk to you a little bit about the importance of taking notes. And I reiterate or urge everyone to take notes, because as good as Ms. Rivers is, she's taking everything that we say down, some things that make sense, some things that don't, throughout the course of this trial. But when you go back to deliberate at the end of this trial, she won't be able to provide you with a real-time live transcript. That's something that occurs later. So your transcript, your real-time live transcript is going to be your notes. Your notes are going to help your recollection as collective as you're back in the jury room. So taking notes and paying attention is incredibly important to both sides. Now, as you go through the facts and the evidence, I want you to remember that Mr. Wright and the witnesses are now on trial. As the judge kind of talked about and mentioned earlier, is that this was 3 years ago, and that there will be times in which detectives or witnesses will have to use transcripts or reports to refresh the recollection, because they've recorded close in time that they recall certain facts are memorialized in reports. So
I have a problem with this point, no regard for human life. Maybe that's the case here. Maybe this is exactly what happened. But to conclude that, or in the alternative, you hear shots going off, you want to find out what's going on, and you want to get up out of there. I'm sorry, but being concerned for you and your friend wanting to go outside and check the perimeter, maybe the girlfriend that you're staying with is, you've got warrants, you're not supposed to have a gun, get out of here. So yes, you're doing something wrong by being in possession of a weapon. You didn't do something else, but because we know how things go, I'm now concerned that you're present at this time. They're going to come knocking. So maybe you should go. So there's plenty of reasons why we could see individuals leaving this apartment building at this time, and that does not mean that they were the shooter. So
their refreshing their recollection is a means and a way for you, ladies and gentlemen, to get the best evidence of what occurred back close in time to August 7th, 2022. What the evidence is going to show, and what I want you to remember as you're going through the facts and the evidence, is that you will see that there's no excuse or justification for the defendant's actions and conduct on August 7th of 2022. What the evidence is going to show is that this defendant had absolutely no regard for human life when he shot Quintavious Wright 6 times at close range on August 7th. And that his only concern after killing Mr. Wright was escaping responsibility from the actions, the deliberate actions that he did on August 7th. Now, this case is about the conscious decisions, as I said, of this defendant, and the evidence will be clear as individuals testify, as the physical evidence is admitted into evidence during the trial, that this defendant is or was on August 7th, 2022, a convicted felon in the illegal possession of a firearm, that this defendant intentionally killed Mr. Wright after a personal argument the two were having on the 3rd floor in the middle of the day of their apartment complex. That the identification of this defendant would be shown beyond a reasonable doubt, that the statements made by witnesses, the evidence that was deduced from these statements and from the evidence from Detective Johnson corroborate this defendant's guilt. And what you will see is that the defendant's actions after he killed Quintavious Wright show a consciousness of guilt of his actions, his deliberate actions on this day. And at the end of this trial, myself and my co-counsel, Ms. Jones Connor, will have the privilege and opportunity to stand before each and every one of you again. And you, by the end of the trial, will probably never want to hear any of us speak again, which we don't hold you accountable for that at all. I have a feeling that none of us want, at the end of any trial, want to hear each other speak or learn about the evidence as it relates to our perspective. But at the end of this trial, the evidence will show that this defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of every count in the indictment. And myself and Ms. Judge Connor will stand before you and ask that you hold the defendant accountable for the actions that he committed on August 7th of 2022. The shooting of Quintavious Wright, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, not 5 times, but shooting Mr. Wright at close range 6 times, ladies and gentlemen. Press contact wound on the chest. We'll ask that you hold the defendant accountable for each one of those shots and ending the life of Quintavious Wright by finding this defendant guilty of each count beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
So
Thank you, Mr.
that was pretty short. And is he calling the victim Quantavious? Or am I just like hearing that? Because it looks like it's Quintavious. No N before the T. And I'm wondering if he's getting confused with like Quintavious Greer's name, because they always add the ES when there's no OU at the end of Quintavious Greer's name. But it sounds like he's calling this victim Tavius. But anyway, I'm a little confused. So we have this theory that, and let's look at what's on this slide again. What they're leading with right here. The first thing that they're leading with is defendant is a convicted felon in illegal possession of a firearm. Guys, I'm telling you, that is going to be the glue of this case. That is what they're using to legally get the jury to say, well, he had a gun, so let's find him guilty of that felony murder. So, and that eases the burden of having to prove ag assault in the instant moment. It's just, he had a gun he wasn't supposed to have, and he was there. Good enough. Good enough. But they're leaning on this as like the first thing here. And then we have this intentional killing following a personal argument. So are we going to get some... We heard McBurney ask about, are you going to have a records custodian come in and testify? I think Abbate said he'd get back to him on that. But where are we getting this evidence of a personal argument? How close in time was this personal argument? Because it's vaguely mentioned here. If this was the case, if we had more specifics, I would have put them in my opening. I would have been like, yeah, he was throwing insults at him like an hour before this went down. He said, I'm gonna come back and get you. Like, if I had that, I would have included it in my opening. So, yeah, and that's the thing. If it's on stills somewhere, if it's on video, maybe you can't hear, maybe there's no audio there, but if there's images of them, like, you know, their body language looks like they're arguing, right? You can ascertain if hands are like this in different frames, maybe they're having strong words with each other. Where are those stills? So do we have stuff like that? So, I don't know. So let's see what Nicole has, you guys. Let's see. Nicole Fagan.
Listening to share screen.
Oh.
Okay. You should be able to, once the states is down, so it should work.
Oh, and Starfish and Coffee, good to see you. So this pink 9mm there's no ballistics. So maybe it belonged to the victim. We didn't hear that they fingerprinted and there were no fingerprints that matched the victim. I would think they would have tested this pink gun for fingerprints and maybe been able to say, we tested it, the fingerprints that we found don't match the victim, so it's not like the victim put it there, or it is the victim's and it didn't fire anything, which would suggest, I don't know. To me, I think we're going to find out they didn't test this gun for fingerprints. Why was this gun there? Was it planted by somebody? Was it dropped there? Did the victim have a firearm? And it's pink, I know. Maybe it was his girl's gun. I don't know. Maybe he was like living up to the kill a cam thing. But if that gun was sitting there and had the prints of the victim, that might change the circumstance. And it would suggest to me another reason why the prosecution would want to lean so heavily on Tuitt was a convicted felon. He's not supposed to be in possession of a gun. So therefore, it shouldn't matter if he was confronted or dealing with some type of heated argument where somebody else pulled a gun on him. I'm wondering if they're removing any possibility or any type of line that could have gotten to a self-defense situation. No, so the unalive weapon was not, they're saying the ballistics, there's no evidence that the pink gun was fired, according to the ballistics. That a 9mm was recovered, a 9mm bullet was recovered from the body. I still think it's weird he was shot at contact right in the chest. And they recover one bullet, but then they're saying he was shot 6 times. What happened to these other 5? They just have the shell casings. It's a little weird. Okay, so, and Aaron's saying, so Aaron must have rewound. So it's the other Aaron and Aaron. You guys are asking great questions. Aaron says, so it's a pink herring. And then Adventure Aaron says, wait, right before I came in, Abbate's PowerPoint said the victim was shot at the end of the 3rd floor hallway. Elevator surveillance was from the 3rd floor hallway. Even weirder now. And McBurney mentioned something pre-trial that he was a bit confused too. About, like, I guess he got confused with the place of arrest being on the 3rd floor of somewhere else versus the shooting being on the floor of the actual shooting incident. So who knows? We'll have to see. Susan, good to see you. Nicole still has her charges pending. So, and Tuitt wants her as counsel. And Tuitt, I mean, Nicole Fagan, I think from just looking at her record, like her success record, I gotta clarify here, she gets acquittals. She does her thing. The judge even said, I appreciate you for not trying to throw a curveball. Like, she didn't try to file any Jackson Denno motions to oppose, whether or not her client was properly Mirandized. She's not disputing that he was properly Mirandized. I think we're going to see why. I think we're going to see that the statement, there's a good chance the jury might think his statement could come off as truthful. That he just didn't want to, he heard gunshots going off, he came outside, didn't want to be in the area. Ayana, I can't make sense of this. You shoot at someone 6 times, you miss 5 times, land 1, but the one you land is right up on someone's chest. I mean, it might make more sense if we see, like, where the defects are. I don't know. Yep, and Aaron's pulling the quote. Thank you. Aaron says, cameras located throughout the property. Some work and some are not operational. Camera captures shooting, but from a distance. So it's going to